Okay, so imagine this, right? Like it's 956 AD. You're at this big coronation,
Yeah.
for the new king of England. And everyone's expecting, well, the whole pomp and circumstance thing. But instead, this young king, he just throws his crown down, storms right out of the cathedral, and runs off to have a threesome.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously.
Mm.
This actually happened, King Edwig.
Hmm.
And that's just the beginning of all the crazy stuff that's gone down at English coronations over the centuries. So we're diving into all that today. You've got this amazing discussion between two historians to work with, covering like everything from 956 AD to William and Mary. So yeah, get ready to unpack, how this whole ritual evolved, the crazy politics behind it all, and how these coronations actually reflect, like, the anxieties of the monarchs themselves.
Yeah, it's fascinating. These coronations, they were never just about the ceremony itself. They were always tied up with the power struggles of the time. Between the church and the monarchy, different factions all vying for influence, even within the royal family itself.
Oh yeah, right off the bat, with Edwig, you see that tension, right? Ditches his own coronation for, well, a distraction, let's say.
Yeah.
He gets publicly called out by St. Dunstan, who is like a major power player in the church. It makes you wonder how much of that story is actually true and how much is just, spin designed to make the church look more powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Those early historical accounts, man, they're tough. You always got to think about, like, who's writing the story, right, and what their agenda might be. But Edwig's coronation, no matter what really went down, it shows how the church was getting more and more assertive. They weren't content just being, like, spiritual advisors anymore. They wanted a real say in how the monarchy was run.
Yeah, and that power struggle, it really explodes during the Gregorian reforms, right?
Yeah.
It's like the church is saying, hold on, this whole divine right to rule thing, let's talk
Mhm.
about that.
Exactly. The Gregorian reforms, it was all about the church getting its power centralized, reining in what they saw as the monarchy, like overstepping. They even tried to control the chrism. That's the sacred oil they used to anoint the monarchs. It was a way to show everyone that their authority came from the church.
So, control the magic oil, control the king. Clever.
Yeah.
But of course, not every monarch was happy about sharing power, right? Like, take Henry III. He loses the crown jewels and then goes completely overboard with how fancy his coronation is. Almost like he's trying to make up for appearing weak.
Oh, that's a pattern you see all the time in history. Monarchs feel insecure. Boom. Huge displays of power and wealth. It's a way to project strength, legitimacy, both to their subjects and to any rivals out there.
It's all about image, right? Controlling how people see you. And speaking of image, let's talk about Henry IV and his holy oil. So supposedly this oil, it was found hidden in a wall with a prophecy from Thomas Becket himself saying it would be used to anoint the true king. Come on, what a story.
Well, Henry IV, he was a usurper, right? He had to make his claim to the throne solid. So tying himself to a revered figure like Becket, having this, like, divinely ordained oil, brilliant PR move. It's a classic example of how they used coronations to manufacture consent, create legitimacy.
Genius. And then you've got Elizabeth I. She takes this whole coronation as propaganda thing to another level. Her procession through London, it was basically one giant spectacle, carefully planned to showcase her English heritage, make her Protestant rule seem totally legit.
Elizabeth I, she got symbolism. She knew how to use it. Every single detail of that coronation was meant to send a message to her subjects, to the world. And you can see that today, even in modern coronations. Symbolism, messaging, it's all carefully thought out, still used today.
It's all connected. But then things get really interesting when you hit the Reformation. Edward VI, he has this totally stripped-down Protestant coronation. Mary Electra brings back Catholicism, even imports special oil for the occasion. And then Elizabeth I ends up with this Catholic Mass that she doesn't even fully take part in.
Yeah.
What a ride.
The Reformation really threw everything up in the air, exposed that tension between the church and the monarchy. You see monarchs trying to figure out all these competing demands, religious, political, and often the results were, well, awkward, contradictory even.
Talk about an identity crisis.
Yeah.
And it's during this crazy time that they changed the coronation oath to include defending, the Protestant Reformed religion established by law. It's a reminder of how much power shifted with the Glorious Revolution. Parliament asserting its authority over the monarch.
That change to the oath, that was huge. Shows a fundamental change in the balance of power. The monarchy doesn't have absolute authority anymore.
So we've gone from a king ditching his coronation for a scandalous rendezvous to the church trying to control the monarchy through sacred oil. And now a king has to swear an oath to be Protestant. And we haven't even gotten to the Stuarts yet. Things are about to get even more interesting. Buckle up.
The Stuarts, they inherited a kingdom that was still kind of reeling from the Reformation. And you see all that religious and political anxiety play out in their coronations, like James I. He had to be so careful, right? As a Scottish king coming in and taking over the English throne.
Yeah, he had to assure everyone he wasn't going to mess with the English church or try to force Scottish traditions on them.
Hmm.
And then to make things even more interesting, his wife, Anne of Denmark, she flat out refused to participate in the whole Protestant ceremony because she was Catholic.
Oh, right. And that actually set a precedent. It continued with the wives of Charles I and Charles II. And it wasn't just like a personal thing. It represented this whole undercurrent of Catholic resistance to the Protestant establishment.
Mhm.
It's another example of how those coronations, they became these flashpoints. For all the religious tension that was bubbling under the surface of English society.
It's like these coronations became a test almost to see, how strong the Protestant Reformation really was and how committed the monarchy was to it.
Yeah.
And then there's Charles I. His coronation was full of what people saw as bad omens. A dove, the symbol of the Holy Spirit. It got broken during the ceremony.
Yeah.
And the sermon, well, it was all about the martyrdom of a king. Kind of creepy, right?
Yeah, looking back, those incidents, they seem to foreshadow Charles I's whole, turbulent reign and his eventual execution. They became part of the story of his downfall. This idea that, like, his reign was doomed from the start. It shows you how powerful symbolism can be and how those, like, seemingly random events can become woven into a bigger narrative, especially when you're looking back on history.
Yeah, it reminds you that history is often written by the winners.
Yeah.
And even like the smallest details can be twisted to fit a certain story. But okay, let's move on to Charles II. Thankfully, his coronation didn't involve any broken birds or spooky sermons. And we actually have this firsthand account from Samuel Pepys. He was
Yeah.
always a good time.
Ah, yes, Samuel Pepys. That guy knew how to enjoy a good coronation, that's for sure. His diary entries, they give us a peek into the more festive side of these things, The crazy feasts, the huge crowds, even his own drunken adventures.
He even admits to sneaking into Westminster Abbey the night before just to get a good spot to watch, talk about dedication. But amidst all the partying, the Stuarts, they also used the coronations to push their claim to divine power, right?
Yeah.
And one example that's super interesting is this whole king's evil thing.
Oh, right. The king's evil. That was the belief that the monarch, by touching someone, could cure scrofula, which, affects the lymph nodes. And that was seen as proof of their divine right to rule. Crazy, right? People would wait in these huge lines just to be touched by the king, hoping for a miracle.
Can you imagine that? Charles II, he touched over 92,000 people during his reign. Must have been exhausting. But it shows you how much people believed in the monarch's power to heal. But the Stuarts, they weren't the only ones who had issues at their coronations. Queen Anne, she had to be carried to hers because she had such bad gout.
Right, right. It reminds you that behind all that ceremony and grandeur, these monarchs, they were real people, with real health problems. And for Anne, her health, it actually became a symbol of how vulnerable she was and how precarious her reign was.
And finally, we get to William and Mary, the first monarchs to rule England together. Their coronation, it marked a big shift for the monarchy, They weren't crowned by divine right, but by the will of Parliament.
Exactly. Their coronation, it symbolized that new balance of power that came out of the Glorious Revolution. And they even changed the coronation oath again to reflect that shift. William and Mary, they swore to govern according to the laws set by Parliament.
So we've seen it all, right? From a king running off for a scandalous little get-together to a queen who had to be carried because of her health, and then a joint coronation showing this big change in power. English coronations, they've been anything but dull. They've reflected the politics, the religion, the social upheaval of each era, giving us this unique window into the past. What stands out to you the most in all of this? What are the key takeaways?
What really strikes me is how these coronations, they were so full of tradition, right? But they were never really set in stone. They were always changing, adapting to the political landscape,
Yeah.
to the personalities of the monarchs, the anxieties of the time.
That's so true. We've seen how religious tension, power struggles, even scandals, it all played a part in shaping these ceremonies. They're the reflection of what was going on,
Yeah.
a historical barometer.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes you think about Charles III, right? I mean, he's coming into this role in a world that's completely different from any of his predecessors. What kind of message will his coronation send? Will he stick with tradition, or will we see something more modern,
That's a good question. I mean, the monarchy's under a lot of scrutiny these days. And with social media and everything, the stakes are even higher.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine if something went wrong? The Twitter storm. But seriously, social media, it has a huge impact on these events now, right?
Yeah.
Coronations aren't just national things anymore. They're global. Every little detail is analyzed, every gesture is interpreted. There's so much pressure on the monarchy to get it right.
Just like the whole world is giving them a grade,
Yeah.
in real time. But it also makes you wonder, can these old rituals, with all their pomp and symbolism, can they still mean something in our modern world? A
Yeah.
world that's so secular.
That's the question, isn't it? The one historians will be debating for years to come. Maybe the meaning has changed, you know? It's not so much about divine right and absolute power anymore. Maybe it's more about tradition, about national identity, about a link to the
Just
past.
finding that balance,
Yeah.
honoring the past, but also acknowledging where we are now. Speaking of the past, if we look at all of this in a broader context, what can we learn about English history by studying these coronations?
Well, they give us this unique perspective, right, on how English society evolved, how the relationship between the monarchy and the church changed over time, the fears, the ambitions of those in power. Each coronation's like a snapshot, capturing a moment in the story of England.
It's amazing how much you can discover just by looking at these ceremonies. It's not just about, crowning a new king or queen. It's about understanding the forces that shaped a nation.
Exactly. And it makes me think about the stories that future historians will tell about our time, you know? What events will they see as important? What rituals and symbols will they look at to try to understand us? What will our coronations tell them, whether they're literal or, metaphorical?
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah,
We think of history as something that happened a long time ago, but we're living through it now. We're creating the history that future generations will be studying.
that's right. And just like those monarchs we've been talking about, we're all shaping the narrative, leaving our mark on history.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into English coronations,
Mm.
from Edwig and his scandalous exit to Charles III and everything in between. It's been a fascinating journey full of intrigue, power struggles, and a whole lot of human drama.
It really has. And to everyone listening out there, I encourage you, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep digging into those hidden stories that have shaped our world. You never know what you might find.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.